Chapter 155, Jealousy. To be honest, although Zhang Xia has not been in the criminal department for too long, anyone with eyes can see what kind of human temperament he is. Last year, Lord Chenying had a treat at Zikanxian. On this occasion, it is inevitable to call some beautiful women to come in and serve the drink. Some of the profligate officials, accustomed to the sound of dogs and horses, began to laugh at the girls on the spot. This Lord Zhang has good facial features and a cold appearance, but he is out of place when he sits in the crowd. When the dusty woman saw it, she couldn't help but move. After all, some people who seem to be righteous and gentlemanly are actually a little more submissive than those who are straightforward. If you come to such an occasion, it is impossible to get out of the mud without staining. Taking a step back, even if he is a true gentleman, wouldn't it be more fun to flirt? So, there were two girls who didn't have any bones, and they wanted to stick to him. But before he could get closer, he stood up. The others immediately laughed and laughed. This Lord Zhang lowered his eyebrows, and bluntly said that he was not strong enough to drink, and he couldn't drink, so it was inconvenient to disturb everyone's interest here, so he said goodbye first. After saying that, he turned around and left. At that time, everyone in the dust-washing hall looked at each other. Chen Shilang's face was not very good. After that time, the criminal department was secretly full of rumors, saying that Zhang Xia was neither interested nor acquaintance. Of course, the two officers also heard about it. And they also heard about Zhang Xia's divorce from Yao's daughter. Originally, the 8 characters were just waiting for a skimming, but suddenly one day they turned yellow. Although I don't know which side wants to withdraw from his relatives first, but he is a big family in Yaofu, and Zhang Xia is from a poor family, so it can't be that Zhang Xia himself is stupid to withdraw from his relatives, right? After all, when the family affairs were decided, he himself agreed. So most of it was the noble and beautiful daughter Miss Yao Shi, who disliked this person for being boring and dull, with a dull and dead face, so she quit her family. They really know what this Master Zhang is doing. There was not a trace of a smile on his face all day long. In the yamen of the criminal department, he often arrived the earliest and left the latest, dealing with files, murder cases, prisons, and laws and regulations all day long, and some small families fell in love with him, and he always ran into a wall because of this unkind and incomprehensible style, and over time, no one cared about him. But now, the two officers couldn't believe their eyes. When they were at the Shuxiang Inn just now, they had already seen Zhang Xuning. After all, such a good-looking girl was really amazing. It was difficult to take people's eyes off it with just a blink of an eye, and she was more beautiful than any woman they had ever seen. Compared with her, what is the delicate moth leaning on the red mansion, and the willow eyebrows of the green pavilion? They are all inferior among the inferior. If they were not on business, they would not have gotten away. But they never thought that not long after they left, this girl would chase after them. And stopped. Master Zhang. The eyes of the two errand officers looked at Zhang Xuning, and quickly turned from initial shock to pity. It's a pity. Such a beautiful girl, her brain is not good. Who has such a good appearance to marry is not flying on the branch. How can she limp her eyes and look at Zhang Xia, and even gave something on Chinese New Year's Eve? The streets are full of pedestrians and horses. The two stood opposite each other, motionless. It's like two sunken stones in a gentle stream. Zhang Xia thought that he had made a decision, and he had warned himself over and over again, but when he saw her again, the wall in his heart shook and collapsed little by little. The body is still and the mind is not quiet. He didn't even think that Zhang Xuning would chase him out, let alone that she would ask him so bluntly as reserved. But when I think about it, isn't this her temperament? Public, domineering, bright, not likely to take it in. If you cower and suffer from gains and losses, you don't look like her. Zhang Xuning looked up at him slightly, and there was a faint sense of grievance in her eyes full of light, but she didn't say it, and even repeated the previous question with a little domineering, "Did Lord Zhang receive it?" Obviously, every sentence is cared about, but Zhang Sha feels that every word is cut. He stood in front of her seemingly unharmed, but his heart was covered with bruises and blood, and he had to squeeze the scroll of paper in his hand hard to ensure that his voice was as smooth as usual. "Received." The two officers next to him glanced at each other, almost suspecting that they had misheard. Looking at this Lord Zhang's seemingly normal expression, he rarely felt something unusual. In the end, Zhang Sha is now receiving the Holy Grace. If they don't know whether they are alive or dead and listen to people's private affairs, how do they know that people will not be afraid and guard against them in the future? The two men bowed and quietly retreated. It's just that when you go out and look back, you obviously have irrepressible curiosity. Zhang Xuning was unconscious, and when she heard Zhang Sha's affirmative answer, her heartbeat suddenly increased a little, but it was accompanied by a faint ominousness, which made her heart tingle like a dark needle. A voice shouted in her head, don't ask again. That's all for now, what else is there not to understand?" But the lingering stinging pain already gave her the illusion that she couldn't breathe, and she stubbornly ignored the voice. "What is written in there, and Master Zhang has seen it?" Zhang Sha said, "I saw it." Zhang Xuning also smiled, and was unprecedentedly frank. Everyone else is cold-faced and unkind, and it is not easy to get along. But Tong Zhou and his party, Xuening was fortunate to be taken care of by the adults all the way, and he knew that you were actually an ice gully jade pot, and King Zhou was guarded. "Zhang Sha, I belong to you. Zhang Sha, I belong to you." There is no shyness like ordinary women, only the lonely courage who does not hit the south wall and does not look back. Zhang Sha felt as if she was about to cry, but on her slightly pale face, that smile never faded, as if she believed that she would definitely get the answer she wanted. In the to-go market, the world is noisy. He was suddenly pulled back to his previous life by the sentence. In the previous life, Zhang Xuning also said such things. It's just that she still couldn't get used to him at that time, just because he and Zhou Yanzi were mortal enemies, and whenever there was an opportunity inside and outside the palace, she arbitrarily teased him, made him angry, ridiculed him, and embarrassed him. Because he knew that he was rigid and conservative, he deliberately laughed. If she accidentally shows a moment of embarrassment, she can often make her slap her hands laugh, as if she has won a battle. Although he has a stoic and silent temperament, he has been tricked for a long time, and it is inevitable that there will be times when he can't hold his breath. It was the depths of winter that day, and the courtiers were ordered to enter the palace to discuss matters. He lived far from the palace, and the road was slippery, and he came later. When I arrived at the Qianqing Palace, I saw a group of important ministers, including Xie Wei, who was already the crown prince and prince, waiting in the side hall. As we all know, Xie Wei is an emperor, and his body is cold. The Holy Lord summoned all the ministers, and it was not unusual for anyone to wait outside, but Xie Wei could wait outside, as if he had never heard of it and seen it before. At that moment, an old man walked in and wondered, "Didn't the Holy God call us to come to discuss matters at this hour? Why did you ask so many people to wait outside?" Xie Wei stood on the steps, but he was still indifferent, and replied again, "The Queen Mother is inside." Everyone immediately looked at each other. The old man choked for a moment, lowered his head and muttered, but said nothing more. Zhang Sha glanced at the Qianqing Palace, and was inexplicably upset. After waiting for more than half a moment, Zheng Bao, the eunuch of the celebrant and the eunuch of the celebrity, personally bent over and sent one person out. It's Zhang Xuning. Dressed in a high bun, holding a delicate wrong gold hand stove, the pink and white cheeks are bright and compelling, and the lips are cherry-colored, but the color seems to be lighter than usual, as if the original lipstick has been rubbed off somewhere. She came out and saw Xie Wei on the stairs first. A trace of disgust quickly crossed her eyes, and she turned her gaze away. I saw him when I went down the steps. So the little bit of brilliance in his eyes turned playful, and he deliberately raised his eyebrows and hooked a smile. In the end, he didn't dare to embarrass him in front of these many ministers, and walked away with a group of palace maids briskly. Then Shenju summoned them to the palace to discuss matters. When he got up after saluting, Zhang Sha happened to see the young and elegant emperor, arranging a section of his sleeve that had been turned up, and a little cherry powder was not obviously stained on the edge of the transparent nail on the ring finger of his right hand, as if there was still a residual warmth of tenderness. He didn't know if anyone else had noticed. But during the hour-long discussion, although he answered fluently, when he did not speak, he was a little more imperceptibly dull than the silence before. When everyone retired and went out of the Jianqing palace, Xie Wei suddenly stopped, glanced at him, and said, "The Jiangnan science field fraud case involves a wide range of people, and Lord Zhang's words today are even less than in the past." Zhang Sha was not familiar with this emperor. But at that moment, I still felt a chill in my heart. He replied, "The matter is big, and I dare not speak in vain." Xie Wei always has a little smile on his face, and he is also very familiar with people, and he often makes people feel like a spring breeze in winter. But after hearing this, he did not answer. The old man next to him happened to come over and invite him to go to the cabinet with him, and Xie Wei went to the duty room with the rest of the auxiliary ministers as if he hadn't mentioned anything. Zhang Sha stood at the foot of the stairs for a moment before walking towards the Wenyuan pavilion to the east. The case of fraud in the field is complicated, and even involves several past presidents of the examination, so it is always necessary to ask the relevant people about their style. It's just that there was some absent-mindedness along the way. Even when Zhang Xuning came over from afar with the palace people, he didn't see it, so he naturally couldn't avoid it. She seemed to have gone to the imperial garden, and there were several palace people behind her, one of them holding scissors, and the others each holding a few cherry plums. The weather is cold, and the plum blossoms are blooming fiercely. Some are red, some are white, and some are yellow. The slender branch in Du Zhang Xuning's own hand, which is a foot long and oblique, is actually a light green color like a bean, which is very rare. I heard that there is a rare green plum tree in the east corner of the imperial garden in the palace, which is planted after the first emperor Shenlang ascended the throne a year later. The monk of the national teacher circular machine and the emperor Xie Wei lost a bet. The palace people are very cherished and dare not move without permission. But when it fell into Zhang Xuning's hands, it was casually climbed, and he pinched it lightly and skillfully, and he couldn't see its preciousness at all. He knew that it would be no good thing to bump into Zhang Xuning, so he didn't want to cause trouble after bowing and saluting, so he left by giving way to the left side. Didn't want him to go to the left, so Zhang Xuning stood on the left. He walked to the right, and Zhang Xuning stood on the right. Anyway, it's just right to block him. Zhang Sha then knew that she was playing tricks again, and his already indifferent face became more and more expressionless, and when he caught a glimpse of her bending her pink lips and looking at herself with a smile, he felt even more annoyance. He said, "The lower official has something to do, and the mother will let it." Zhang Xuning waved his hand to tell the palace people to stay away, blocking his way. Looking at his cold eyebrows, he actually clinged to the green plum, raised his sharpened chin, looked at his face, and teased, "Lord Zhang's temper is stinky and hard, but this eyebrow is good looking. What if this palace doesn't let you pass? Where is such words and deeds like the queen of the world?" Zhang Sha finally brushed her away, made a solemn face, and said coldly, Niang is the mother of a country, the position is extremely cunning, and her behavior should be measured, and she is both a husband and a king. Such frivolous remarks may provoke criticism from the government and the opposition." Zhang Xuning didn't seem to expect him to speak. Was stunned for a moment, and then as if he had discovered something interesting, he clapped his hands and said, "When you are a stuffy gourd with a sawmouth mouth, I am embarrassed that you have cultivated many times to become Siejuan second, and Genju is not interesting. If you don't think about it, there will be times when you can't suppress your anger." Zhang Xia was unmoved, and only said, Niang is like this, where is the saint placed, where is the subordinate place, and where is the courtesy, righteousness, and shame? When he first saw Zhang Xuning in the summer resort, it was like this. Unexpectedly, Zhang Xuning heard this, although her joking expression did not change, but the bottom of her eyes suppressed a little anger, which made her face more colorful, walked in front of him, almost toe against his toes, and pulled the corners of her lips. "Who told the head of the palace to see you back? It belongs to Lord Zhang." Such words should have been lingering love words, but they could come out of her mouth, but they were frivolous and obedient, and secretly very harsh and sarcastic. At that moment, Zhang Xia's patience reached 10. He knew that the other party was teasing him, so he took a step back and lowered his eyes. The lower officials are upright and not afraid of rumors. The government and the opposition criticize. I am afraid that you are not happy to see it, and please be cautious. Lowered his gaze, and could only see Zhang Xuning's embroidered phoenix tail. There was a moment of silence. Then a few petals of green plum came into view, and it was Zhang Xuning's green plum that dotted the corner of his eye. As he raised his eyes slightly, there were slightly cold, sharp wooden thorns at the end of the thin branches, and a very faint and thin blood mark was drawn at the corner of his eye. The pain is subtle, but it's real. Zhang Xuning changed her thoughtful expression, looked at him and said, Lord Zhang abides by etiquette and righteousness, and is patient. Why can't he be angry today when he is provoked by a few casual words of nonsense from this palace? Zhang Xia did not speak. Zhang Xuning's plum branch did not take it back, it was still pointed at the corner of his eye, and his gaze moved to his cold and silent eyes, and he looked at it inquiringly for a long time, and a smile suddenly bloomed on his lips, as if he didn't even dare to believe it, and asked, Are you jealous? At that moment, Zhang Xia's patience seemed to have reached its limit, and he walked straight away. Zhang Xuning smiled and bent down behind him. Back in his mansion, he thought that Zhang Xuning was talking nonsense like before to disturb his mind, and looked through the file, but the ridiculous two words in his mind lingered. Zhang Xuning secretly supported Zhou Yinzi, but Zhou Yinzi was a big disaster in the DPRK. How could he be fascinated by Hugh and even jealous? It's just that she deliberately verbally insulted him. But he turned the file page by page, but he didn't even sort out half of the clues. The lone lamp shone through the night, and what came to mind was the thin lip grease and the cherry pink stained on the emperor's nails. Zhang Xia hated his ability to perceive every detail. There are even those small clues, which can also make him peek at the tip of the iceberg, which makes him impetuous, and he can't look at a word anymore. Just think, how can there be such a bad woman in the world? However, after a long time, when he was in prison, when he looked out of the clouds through the small iron window, he forgot all the bad things beside him, but always remembered the day when she laughed playfully and bitterly, and said the joke he said. Who told the head of this palace to come back and belong to Lord Zhang? At that time, banter and vitriol, anger and ridicule all faded from the face in the memory, leaving only the breeze and the snow plum pale green. She had played tricks on him, and she had pleaded with him. She had squeezed him, and she had shown occasional softness. She dragged him into the whirlpool, but in the end, the person who was greedy for life and afraid of death also gave up that life to repay him. And at this moment, after 2 lifetimes, she stood in front of her, no longer always jokingly calling him Master Zhang, but calling him Zhang Xia very seriously, frankly admitting that she belonged to him. In this life, she is not a queen, he is not a courtier. They were supposed to be together. Zhang Xia's whole body seemed to have been cut in half by the blunt knife of fate. Half of him was exposed, cold and sensible, and half of him was sunk into hell, miserable and hopeless. In a trance, it was the day of Shankingwen in Tongja. In this life, Siawei was dressed in a Taoist robe for hunting, stood on the rugged mountain rock, and asked him, "Do you also belong to her?" He stopped, was silent for a long time, and said word by word, "I love her." It was really the most open moment in his 2 lives, and he even threw away all the burdens and got a complete release. But the corners of Siawei's eyes twitched slightly, and he only laughed, as if he was very curious, and asked, "That's really strange. How could Xie feel that Lord Zhang was more honest with others than with his sweetheart?" He stood there for a long time, staring at Siawei. Siawei sneered lightly, had no gentleness towards him, and said lightly, "Ning Er is a fool. If you have scruples, don't provoke her. The breeze is no longer cold, the people in the capital have changed into newly made spring shirts, and the weeping willows on the side of the street are also faintly green. But the flowers are about to bloom, but the cold plums are all withering, right?" Zhang Sha came back to his senses. Zhang Xuning looked at him, only to feel that the bottom of these eyes seemed to have passed the eternal struggle, and there was a faint sense of familiarity. But she didn't have time to dig deeper. Because the next moment, Zhang Sha's words made her head go blank all of a sudden, and a buzzing earthquake sounded, giving birth to a feeling of being lightly stepped on cotton. Zhang Sha looked at her and said slowly, "Second Miss Zhang forgives, there is already someone you want in your heart."